Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're setting up what might just be the ultimate heavyweight intellectual showdown in human history. We are talking about the age-old battle between rigorous scientific reasoning and deeply held religious faith. For centuries, these two colossal forces have basically been locked in a stalemate, right? But what if they don't actually have to be? What if someone found a way to draw a brilliant, totally unshakable line between what we can know and what we can believe? Well, that is exactly what we're going to explore today, through the mind of one of history's absolute greatest philosophers. Back in 1781, Immanuel Kant dropped an intellectual shockwave with this single mic drop sentence: "I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith." Now, hold on. It's really important to understand that Kant isn't attacking logic or science here. He isn't saying knowledge is bad or that we should all just be ignorant. Actually, scratch that. It's more like he's doing something much more profound. He is defining the strict, absolute boundaries of human reason. He's drawing a definitive map of what the human mind can and cannot actually do. Which naturally brings us to the core question: how did one of history's greatest thinkers actually pull off reconciling science and religion? Think about it. If our reason completely fails to prove the existence of God, does that mean we're all just forced into absolute skepticism or atheism? Are we stuck abandoning our faith just because we can't put it in a test tube? Or is there another way to understand our place in the universe, a way that protects both our minds and our souls? Let's dive right into this by unpacking part one, the paradox of faith. So Kant realized something fascinating. Human reason is incredibly powerful. I mean, it can build massive cities, it charts the stars, it cures diseases, but it hits a solid brick wall when it comes to things beyond our physical senses. Think of our minds kind of like a super highly advanced virtual reality headset. It perfectly organizes everything we can see, hear, touch, and measure. But because of this hard limit, questions about God, the soul, or the afterlife, they exist completely outside of this headset. And because of that, theoretical reason, the kind of logic we use for math and science, can't prove or disprove God's existence. It literally just doesn't have the tools for the job. Moving right along, let's explore part two, limits of theoretical reason. When we try to ignore those limits, we face a massive intellectual crisis. The system basically glitches. Kant brilliantly illustrated this with a grand divide. On one side, we have the phenomenal world. That's the world exactly as we experience it through our senses. This is the domain where science and logic work absolutely perfectly. On the other side, though, we have the noumenal world, which is reality as it is in itself, totally independent of human perception. The problem is, when our reason tries to cross over from the phenomenal world to map out the noumenal world, it just falls into deep, unsolvable contradictions. Because of this massive divide, Kant concluded that all metaphysical proofs of God ultimately fail. You simply can't point a telescope at the sky or use a calculator to prove the divine. It doesn't work. Whenever reason attempts to demonstrate the existence or, hey, even the non-existence of God, it just ends in insoluble disputes. People just argue in circles forever because they're trying to apply physical, phenomenal tools to a completely non-physical, noumenal reality. But right here is where Kant pulls off an absolute masterstroke. By showing that theoretical reason hits this wall, he doesn't just throw his hands up and embrace atheism. Instead, he pivots. He shows that right where theoretical science stops, a completely legitimate concept steps in. He called it rational faith, or Vernunftsglaube. And to be clear, this is not just some blind belief for a fleeting emotional feeling. It's a belief that is rigorously justified on practical grounds rather than theoretical ones. So, how do we find these practical grounds? Let's get into part three, the moral path. Having proven that the mind can't just calculate its way to God, Kant turns to a totally different part of the human experience. He uses our internal sense of right and wrong to build a sturdy bridge right over this huge intellectual divide. I want you to reflect on your own internal moral compass right now. Kant observed that every rational person experiences this moral law within themselves. He famously called it the categorical imperative. That's the undeniable command inside of us demanding we act according to universal moral principles. It's doing the right thing simply because it is right, completely regardless of whether it benefits us personally. And this intense moral duty pushes us toward a very specific goal. It demands we strive for what Kant calls the highest good, or the summum bonum. This is an ultimate state of justice where perfect virtue is finally united with perfect happiness. But let's be real for a second. We all know from looking at the world around us that being a good person doesn't always mean you're going to be happy in this life. In fact, sometimes doing the right thing actually makes life way harder. Perfect justice is basically never achieved here in the phenomenal world. This builds such a beautiful logical sequence. We start at step 1. We all experience this undeniable moral law within us. That naturally leads to step 2. Our duty commands us to strive for the highest good, that perfect union of virtue and happiness. But because that justice isn't guaranteed in our physical, everyday life, reason practically demands step 3. We must postulate or assume the existence of the conditions that actually make this ultimate justice possible. This logic completely transforms our everyday ethical duty into a literal demand for cosmic justice. To make this highest good possible, Kant says our practical reason demands 3 foundational pillars. First, freedom, because, well, morality means absolutely nothing if we aren't free to choose. Second, the immortality of the soul, because achieving perfect virtue and being rewarded with perfect happiness definitely takes way more time than a single mortal life allows. And third, God. But notice this very carefully. God isn't a scientific hypothesis here. God is postulated as the necessary moral guarantor. God is the ultimate assurance that virtue and happiness will eventually reconcile. All right, let's bring it all together in part 4, knowing versus believing. This brings us to Kant's brilliant grand synthesis. He cleanly severs mathematical proof from moral necessity. By separating our lived experience into these distinct realms, he allows both science and religion to breathe. He establishes this strict distinction between knowing and believing. Knowing God is impossible because God transcends all empirical experience, and human knowing is strictly limited to our senses. But believing in God? That is entirely justified. Why? Because our ethical life points completely beyond the physical world toward a just moral order. Kant is literally projecting both science and religion by keeping them perfectly in their respective lanes. So ultimately, Kant neither proves nor disproves God. Instead, he shows us that the very limits of our knowledge are exactly what open up the possibility of a rational faith. By completely tearing down those faulty logical and metaphysical proofs of God, Kant didn't destroy religion. Not at all. He rebuilt it on the unshakable, universal foundation of human morality. He made faith a deeply rational response to our own ethical duty. As we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with a final thought to really ponder. If we cannot scientifically prove God, is a faith demanded by our own internal moral compass actually a much stronger foundation? Think about it. Perhaps an unprovable faith, one born directly from our own inescapable ethical duty to do what's right, is far more powerful and way more personal than any mathematical theorem could ever be. Thanks for exploring this fascinating philosophy with me.